Welcome to Demystifying Cryptography and Cryptocurrency, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Sarah Weiss, and I'm your moderator for today. Our presenters for the webinar today is Sherry Davidoff and Matt Durin. Sherry Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security and the author of 3 books, including Data Breaches, Crisis, and Opportunity. She's a certified penetration tester and a forensic analyst and a graduate of MIT. Sherry has been called a security badass by the New York Times. Matt Durin is the Director of Training and Research at LMG Security and a Black Hat USA instructor. He holds his computer science degree from the University of Montana, and his malware research has been featured on the NBC Nightly News. Sherry and Matt are co-authors of the new book, Ransomware and Cyber Extortion. Sherry, I'm passing you control of the webinar.
Appreciate it. I don't know about you, I follow the price of Bitcoin pretty closely, and it's been very exciting lately, and because it's in the news. This webinar is really very well timed. So this week, Bitcoin hit its all-time high. Yesterday it was at 72. This morning when I woke up, it was actually above 73, and now it's back down a little bit. But this is huge news, not just for folks in cryptocurrency, but really it has impacts on our broader ecosystem, whether it's economic and also with respect to crime. We're also seeing that Bitcoin is jumping in part because there's a halving event coming up. Okay, today we're going to start off though by talking about how cryptography works, ransomware, how it works under the hood and how encryption is part of that. We'll talk about passkeys. We will demystify cryptocurrency. I'm really excited about this. We'll cover digital signing and contracts, how they work, and then how all of this relates to the little like icon in your web browser, the lock icon. Finally, we'll talk about encrypted email and Matt's going to wrap up by sharing a bit about quantum computing and the future and why it's still okay to sleep at night and we shouldn't all panic yet. But first, what did all those things have in common? VPNs, the little lock icon, the dark web, also ransomware and cryptocurrency and end-to-end encrypted communications. All of those have one really important concept in common, and that is asymmetric key cryptography. And I know this is a mouthful, but theoretically, it's a fundamentally simple concept that all of us should understand. It underlies everything important in cybersecurity. I mean everything. It really affects all of what we do today. So to level set, we're just going to start off by covering a few key simple concepts, and then we're going to move on. We'll start with encryption. What is encryption? Encryption is just the process of scrambling data so that it can only be read by authorized parties, by the people that you want to be able to read it. So modifying data so it can only be understood by authorized parties. Now, how does encryption work? Well, in order to encrypt or decrypt data, you need 2 things, an algorithm and a key. And an algorithm is really just a logical step-by-step process for doing something. That looks delicious, Matt. Tell me why you put that in there.
Sure. So when we think about algorithms, really what we want to talk about is, like Sherry just said, it's just a logical step-by-step procedure that if we follow it correctly, we end up with a desired result on the other end. So again, think about something like a chocolate cake recipe. We have instructions to preheat the oven to a specific temperature. We combine ingredients in specific proportions. You add that one special ingredient that makes it unique to you. That's like your key. And then you follow the rest of the instructions to move to the end product. Mix the batter, bake, cool, frost, and then enjoy what your algorithm has now created. An encryption algorithm, while obviously a little bit more mathematically complex, is fundamentally no different than something like a recipe. It's just following steps from start to finish and then being able to get from one end to the other. Very easy.
So now we know what an algorithm is. Let's talk about a key. What is a key? The key is the secret ingredient in your recipe. And when it comes to computer stuff, the key is just a long random number. Here's what a key actually looks like. So I went onto my computer and I found a key and I opened up a file to look at it. It's literally just a long random string of characters and numbers and all kinds of other stuff. And you want the key to be really long and random because you don't want anyone to be able to guess your secret ingredient. That's the point. The key is really just this long, hopefully random secret number. That's it. So an algorithm and a key. Now you can use this to encrypt anything. We're just encrypting things using math. And in computer land, everything is math. Everything is numbers. This cute picture of a puppy dog and a cat is really just numbers secretly under the hood. And so we can encrypt it. We can encrypt audio. You can encrypt this streaming video and probably are. You can encrypt all kinds of stuff and decrypt it. So let's talk about the ways that we can encrypt things. We're really working up to the ultimate most important concept, asymmetric key cryptography. But first, we'll learn about something simpler, symmetric key cryptography. It's a mouthful and a complicated way of saying that what one key encrypts, the same key can decrypt. So you have one key that can be used to encrypt and decrypt things. So you can see it exactly on the screen. If I have a secret, I use the encryption algorithm and my key, and I scramble it, and then whoever receives it or whoever is looking at it just uses the decryption algorithm with the same key. Symmetric key encryption is often used for things like laptop encryption, USB drive encryption, for a couple reasons. Number one, it's fast. Symmetric key encryption is actually much faster than what we're about to talk about, asymmetric or public key encryption. The other reason is that you don't need to transfer the key anywhere. The key can just stay still. Now, I know you might be thinking to yourself, well, how secure is that if the key to decrypt the thing is on the device itself? Keep in mind, there are ways to make it so that you can decrypt a device with a key even without being able to read the key. So for example, a TPM chip on a computer is typically designed so that the key is built in with hardware and you can never read the key. Nobody can extract the key. You just use that chip to do math, to do operations, and the key is embedded in it. So that's just one example of how we might implement encryption at rest using metric keys. So now let's talk about a trickier case, encryption in transit. If I want to send Matt a message and Selena can hear us, how am I going to keep this secret, right? If we're using symmetric key encryption, the same key encrypts and decrypts. So let's say my key is very simple, it's 42. I can't just say, hey Matt, the key to decrypt my message is 42 because Selena will hear this, and we don't want that. So instead, we need a better way to encrypt information as it goes over the internet. Remember, when your information goes over the internet, it travels through lots of other computers. Whether you're surfing the web or you're sending an email across the internet, that email might go through lots of other computers. And so we want to make sure that it is put in an envelope. So how do we do this? We're going to use the magic of asymmetric or public key encryption. Okay, everything we've just talked about is leading up to this moment. I know this is a lot of jargon. You guys are doing great. This is it, the top of the mountain. So asymmetric or public key encryption means that we have a pair of keys. They're mathematically generated to go together like yin and yang. What one key encrypts, the other key decrypts. So I might know the encryption algorithm and I want to send Matt a secret. I'm going to lock it up with a public key and send it over to him. And he has the corresponding private key, which he uses to decrypt that message. So what one key locks, the other key unlocks. I'll give you an example. So a friend of mine had a small business in West Philadelphia, and he had a lot of very expensive shipments that were coming to him. They would get delivered to his front porch. And of course, what happens when you get something expensive delivered to your front porch in West Philly? Well, it gets stolen. So he wanted to prevent that from happening. He built this beautiful box, and from the inside, he screwed it down to the porch so that nobody could move the box. And he put a padlock on it. Now, most of the time, the padlock was open. That means anybody could open the box. This is equivalent to giving everybody a key to open the box, right? An invisible key so that the box will just be open all the time. And then when UPS or FedEx delivered their package, they would lock the box. So now, who is the only person that can open that box? It is Sam, because he is the only one that has the corresponding private key. He's the only one with the key to open that box. Now, how does this relate to us trying to send messages across the internet? Well, forget about Sam. I'm going to talk about Matt because he's right here. So Matt, if I want to send you a secret message, which I do all the time, right? We exchange secret messages probably like 12 times a day over email. So what I do is, first of all, Matt generates a public-private key pair. You can do this on your own computer. Poof! You have two little pieces of math, two numbers. One of them is your private key, which you keep very secret, and the other one is your public key. And so he can say, hey, Sherry, here's my public key. You can encrypt messages to me, and I will be able to read them. He can put it on the world, out in the world. He can put it on websites. He can put it on key servers. You want to publish that public key. Only you have the corresponding private key. So that's what we do. So when I want to send Matt a secret message, then I just use the encryption algorithm and his public key. And that scrambles the message. And then when Matt wants to read it, he takes his trusty private key that only he has, and he uses the decryption algorithm, and he can read the secret that I sent to him. And that is how we are able to send secure messages remotely, which is kind of cool. Now, this concept, this technology of asymmetric key encryption can also be used for evil, not just for good things. So let's see how ransomware criminals do it. Matt, do you want to tell us about REvil as an example?
Oh, I'd love to. When we're talking about the use of encryption, what comes to mind for a lot of people is ransomware, and mainly because it's something that's in the headlines a lot. We see a lot of big companies being taken down with it. Obviously, they encrypt files to prevent access, to prevent business, and to prevent normal operations. And they do this using a hybrid model. Now, Sherry mentioned already that when we're talking about encryption, there's really two different kinds that we're talking about. Symmetric key, where the same key is used to lock and unlock, and then asymmetric, where there are two different keys. The difference between these comes down to speed. And so when we see a cyber criminal group using something like this, especially a modern ransomware group, they will traditionally use what's called a hybrid model. So they will generate a symmetric key, usually on the computer system that they're encrypting. They will then encrypt all the files and then use a public-private key pair to encrypt that key. So that way, if somebody does manage to even find where the key is on the system, it doesn't matter because it's still encrypted. In a lot of cases, too, we will see multiple encryption algorithms being used to encrypt that key. And we saw with the Kaseya case a couple of years ago, a lot of ransomware groups will have a master key. So either an affiliate can decrypt those files or decrypt the key to decrypt those files, or the ransomware operators themselves can do so. We're not going to go too into depth in ransomware for this webinar, but if you want to know more about how all this works, join us next month. We're doing Ransomware Reshaped, Evolving Your Defenses, and we'll dive a little bit more into the depths of how ransomware impacts your systems.
Thanks, Matt. That was a really interesting dive into how REvil works. I think it's fascinating that they're using that combination of symmetric key encryption for speed and asymmetric key encryption for security purposes. So we're really seeing criminals using encryption in very advanced ways, and we can learn from that as a society. There's another really important way that encryption and cryptography can be used, and that is with digital signing. So the purpose of digital signing is so that you can verify the authenticity of a message, that it hasn't been modified, the integrity, so that you can authenticate the sender or the person who signed it. And it also helps you accomplish non-repudiation. So people can't say, oh, it wasn't me, I didn't send it. Now remember, all of this depends on the security of the private key. So it's always possible for someone to say, my private key was stolen, I really didn't send that message. That is an issue. Everything when it comes to cryptography depends on the security of your keys. It doesn't matter how strong your algorithm is, so keep that in mind. So let's talk about how digital signing works in general. In digital signing, again, you have a pair of keys. Asymmetric key encryption also goes by the name public key cryptography. So one of the keys is your public key, the other is your private key. And what one key signs, the other key verifies. So if I have a document and I want everyone to know that I have read this and signed it, I can sign it with my private key and put it out there in the world, and then anybody out in the world can verify it was me using my corresponding public key, because they can tell only I could have taken that action. Again, yes, let's use an example from Sam's big box. So let's say one day we come up to the box and it's unlocked, or it's locked, and then a few hours later we come back and the box is open. Who could have unlocked that box? Only Sam, because only Sam has the private key. Again, unless it was stolen. Got to keep those keys secure. But by default, assuming the keys are secure, only Sam could have taken that action. And that's exactly the way digital signing works. You are using math to take an action that only the holder of the private key could have taken, and you're verifying it using the corresponding public key. Now, there's one little bit of information that you need to understand before we can dive into how cryptocurrency works. We are like 99% of the way there. In order to really understand fully how cryptocurrency works, you also need to understand the concept of hashes, which are also called cryptographic checksums. So basically, you're doing math on any piece of data. It could be a book, it could be a contract, it could be a piece of music. And you're going to boil it down into one checksum, a hash that looks just like the one you see in the middle of the screen there. Now let's imagine that you change one letter in a book or a phrase. So I have this phrase, "Go Packers," and somebody, before we aired this presentation, somebody who had access to these slides, I'm so sorry, changed this to "Go Lions." Who would have done that? Well, when that happened, the MD5 hash, completely changed. So you could even change one letter and that hash would be completely different. The checksum would be completely different. So that tells you if there has been even one little modification to a contract after it was signed, those hashes aren't going to match and it's not going to be valid. Or let's say I cryptographically sign a message and somebody modifies, like an email, and somebody modifies that email after I've signed it, you will get an invalid signature because the message will no longer match the hash. Okay, so let's see how this works in action. Let's say Alice wants to purchase 300 shares of stock, Coinbase, a relevant example from the news. So when she tells her stockbroker, I want to purchase 300 shares, how does he know it's really her? Well, she cryptographically signs it. She's going to sign it with her private key, and you can see that at the bottom right there, and she's going to feed that into the signature algorithm along with the message. And then she's actually going to come out with a hash. That's a hash of the message along with her private key, and she appends that to the message and sends it out on the internet. And now Sam sees that. He says, okay, Alice told me to purchase 300 shares, and there's this little piece of math at the bottom of that. There's this little piece of data, the hash. I'm going to use Alice's public key and the message along with the verification algorithm, and I'm going to see if I get the same signature and if it verifies correctly. And poof, if it does, I know that this message has not been modified and that Alice actually did sign it. So again, what one key signs, the other key verifies. Make sense? All right, again, feel free to shout out in the chat, in the Q&A, and we're happy to take some questions. Now, this is an extremely powerful concept. It can be used in so many ways. And Matt, when we were getting ready for this presentation, I know the thing you were most excited about was how digital signing can help us get rid of passwords. We hate passwords. Matt, take it away. Tell us how this works.
Yeah, nobody likes passwords. That is absolutely true. And one of the really amazing things that we can do with this public-private key technology is basically replace passwords. This comes down to a concept called a passkey. And if you've watched our Beyond Passwords webinar, we talked about this a little bit. Passkeys are one of the new advancements that is leading us towards this bright, rosy, amazing passwordless future that I think we are all in a rush to get to. And it basically comes down to exactly what Sherry just described. Passkeys consist of two keys, a public key and a private key. And all these are usually maintained on either a device, like your cell phone, or on an external dongle, like a YubiKey or something like that. One verifies a signature, the other one verifies you. And that communication means that you cannot have to remember a password to log into a website because you have that unique key pair that you're using to log in. To give you an example of how something like this would work, let's look at something like signing into Microsoft's Office 365 system. So with a correct setup or a proper setup on the Office 365 system, I can sign into it through a web browser with just my username and then get a notification on my phone. And here's generally how this works. The Microsoft 365 system is going to send a challenge to my phone. Once it gets to my phone, I'm going to use my authenticator and usually a biometric element like either a facial scan or a retina scan or a thumbprint or something like that. That is going to sign that challenge with my private key. We're then going to send that back over to Microsoft. They're going to verify that signature with my public key. And if those two match, I have now verified that it is actually me logging in. And just like that, I'm into my application, no password required. It is, again, it's an amazing piece of technology, and it's going to be really handy in securing things like your online email accounts. We don't have to worry about passwords as long as we maintain the security of those keys.
Thanks, Matt. I think that puts a lot of context behind a technology that's going to become increasingly important. So thanks for peeling back that curtain. Okay, let's talk about how all of these technologies are used to make cryptocurrency work. So cryptocurrency, of course, very relevant today. Let's jump in. My daughter asked me the other day, what's a Bitcoin? And I said, oh, a Bitcoin is a chain of digital signatures. That's what Satoshi Nakamoto said. And then she said, huh? And then we went into public-private key encryption, and I got her a little smoothie, and we went through exactly what we're talking about on the webinar today. So where does this come from? Well, first of all, this comes from an email that went to the cryptography mailing list at metsdow.com on Halloween of 2008. I was actually one of the people on that list. There was an ongoing discussion about the importance of electronic cash at the time. And we'll get into why people were interested in making electronic cash. But a couple things to note are that Bitcoin is designed to be anonymous. It's designed to be peer-to-peer and not require a trusted third party. So in the real world, cash allows you to be anonymous, at least in theory, if you would like to be, if you don't know the person. There's no middleman, and that means no fees or things like that. And it's non-reversible. Once you make a payment, then you can't just take that. You can't reverse that transaction easily later without a tussle. The downside of cash on the internet is that it requires a physical transfer. Now, why might we want digital cash on the internet? One reason is privacy. I'm a big believer in privacy, and I think it's important for us to have a way to avoid things like tracking and invasive marketing. We have all kinds of information we may want to keep private, and your purchase history can reveal extensive information about you. Also, one way that cryptocurrency really is used extensively around the world is that many communities are underserved by banks. There are a lot of people who can't get a debit card or can't get a credit card, especially in other countries around the world. And so when they want to send a payment across the world, they are able to use cryptocurrency to do that. So it's really been facilitating online and digital transactions in these underserved communities. Because it can be anonymous, it can, of course, by default help to prevent identity theft. And it can also help to protect freedoms. For example, when journalists are working in other countries or you have intelligence agencies that are doing their work around the world, they might want to be able to make purchases that are untraceable, and they can use digital cash to do that. And then finally, that last bullet may be the biggest development of all. You can use digital cash to have quick international transactions. You don't have to wait days for your transaction to complete. And in fact, legitimate banks around the world are starting to take advantage of that by building cryptocurrency into their infrastructures so that they can leverage it themselves for transactions. So that's been really interesting. Stay tuned. There's been a lot of movement on integration of cryptocurrency with the banking system. So very exciting. All right, back to Bitcoin. Come on, that's what we're here for, right? So Bitcoin is a chain of digital signatures. What does that even mean? Well, first of all, when it comes to Bitcoin, we do not send coins around the world. The same way when I pay Matt $1, the bank is not actually sending him $1, or if you send somebody money on Venmo or somewhere else, nobody's actually taking that cash and moving it. There's a ledger where somebody is keeping track. They're deducting my account and adding to Matt's account or Selena's account. And the same is true with Bitcoin, except it's not one central person or organization that's keeping track. It is a distributed ledger that anybody can view. And that's really the power of it. So I'm a visual person. I don't know about you guys, but if you're curious, this is what Bitcoin actually looks like, the Bitcoin blockchain. So here you can see the Bitcoin folder opened up on somebody's computer, and you can see all the different blocks in that folder. Each one of those files represents a block. And inside each one of those files is a header and a chain of digital signatures that represent the transactions that have been made. Okay, so here's a simplified version of the blockchain. These are different blocks. They are all linked together. The way blocks are linked together, by the way, is that each block has some metadata, some information about that block. Here's the block number, identifier, here's whatever. And then in it is a hash of the header of the previous block. So hashing is really important for linking these blocks together. There's information about the previous block in the next block so that they're all in a chain. And then each one represents a certain amount of Bitcoin. When it's mined, and we'll get to that in a second, the miner that successfully solves the puzzle, essentially, is rewarded with a certain amount of Bitcoin. A new block is started. That Bitcoin is assigned to that person using their key. And from that point on, they can complete transactions. They can pay other people. And each transaction is linked to the one before it so that you end up with this chain. All right, so often we get the question, how are Bitcoins made? Well, this is a very simplified version, but basically, Bitcoin comes pre-built with, there's not an endless supply of Bitcoins, right? And in order to get more Bitcoins, you have to solve a very hard math problem. That's actually, again, baked into the system. It takes lots of computing power these days to solve these math problems. They actually get harder and harder over time. So in the beginning, some of my friends back in 2009 were like, hey, Cher, we're going to go to the computer cluster and go mine Bitcoin. And I was like, nah, I'm going to go to the movies. And boy, howdy, do I regret that. You have no idea. Although, like, I wouldn't miss this for the world. But, some of them are like living on beaches in Puerto Rico. Anyway, now you can't just like go to a computer and mine Bitcoin because it takes so much computing power that you really do need specialized equipment to do it. And once a miner finds the answer, guesses the answer to this puzzle, it puts it out there to the network. And when enough computers have verified that, yes, in fact, that is the answer, then they are rewarded with a new block. And the new block right now is equivalent to 6.25 Bitcoin. That reward gets cut in half approximately every 4 years. It's really about the number of blocks that have been mined, so it's not on a specific date. And so that's why you've been hearing about the halving in the news, because we are coming very close to the point where our reward will only be half of what it is today. So right now that reward is 6.25 Bitcoin. Remember, one Bitcoin, at least right now, is worth $70,000 or more. So you can do the math. That is hundreds of thousands of dollars if you successfully mine a Bitcoin. As soon as the halving happens, which could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be in a couple weeks, then all of a sudden that reward will get cut in half, and the miners will make half as much for every Bitcoin they mine, and it will still get harder and harder. Matt, I know you have a good joke about the volatility of Bitcoin.
You want to hear my dad joke? So there's a joke that gets passed around when we talk about cryptocurrency, and it's a son who goes to his father, and his father asks him what he wants for his birthday, and he says, "I want one Bitcoin." His dad looks at him and says, $60,800. I don't have $54,500. What would you even need $58,900 for? The good representation of how quickly these prices can fluctuate. Okay, I promise I won't tell any more terrible jokes.
I don't believe you. But anyway, when you see news stories about the halving is coming and how this is going to affect the industry, this is why you're about to see that. And it's really going to affect the mining industry. Okay, I'll stop talking about cryptocurrency, but feel free to drop me a line over LinkedIn, or if you see me in person, we should get a beer and we can totally talk a lot about cryptocurrency. All right, so another thing that my daughter asked me is like, so you store your Bitcoin in wallets? And I said, no, you don't store coins in wallets when it comes to cryptocurrency. I know, that's really confusing, right? Why? Instead, you store your keys in wallets, which is totally wrong. Who keeps keys in wallets? I guess maybe my door key now, But no, you store your keys in wallets. And remember, it's really important to keep your private key very safe. So the security of your wallet is of the utmost importance, and where you store your wallet matters. Now, we've hinted here that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general depend on asymmetric key cryptography, right? Public-private keys. Because in order to do a transaction, to create that chain of digital signatures, you need your private key to spend your money. So let's see how that works. Alice has some Bitcoin. That means that she has a public-private key pair, and her public key is linked to some amount of Bitcoin on the blockchain, which she can now spend. So she wants to pay $500 to the plumber, and this plumber is highly technical and very excited to accept her money in Bitcoin. Yay. So she needs to get, what does she need to get? She needs the public key of the plumber, right? Because she needs to know where this is going. Remember, it's not going to a person. It's really getting linked to a public-private key pair. And there's no identifier necessarily that links a public-private key to a specific name of a person. That's the anonymity piece of this. Okay, so Alice is gonna, don't get overwhelmed. We're gonna step through this. Starting at the bottom, Alice is gonna use her private key with a signature algorithm. What is she gonna sign? Obviously, she needs to sign the message that says, I'm paying $500 to the plumber. How do we identify the plumber? We use the plumber's public key. And we need to link this to the previous transaction on the blockchain, the one that she has control of. So we get information about the previous transaction, we hash that along with the plumber's public key, and we also use that as input to the signature algorithm. We sign that, we put it out into the world as a new transaction. I want to pay $500 to the plumber. Here's the plumber's public key. Here's information about the previous transaction, and I'm signing it with my private key. Love, Alice. That goes out there to the Bitcoin network. Computers in the Bitcoin network verify using her public key that this is legitimate. And then eventually the plumber is able to see that that has propagated its way through the network. And yes, he successfully now owns that Bitcoin. $500 is his. And that new transaction is now linked to his public key. So Matt, anything you want to add here?
No, not to this one. I think you gave a really nice example of exactly how cryptocurrency payments work.
This diagram took me so long, you have no idea. Okay, so Matt, tell us how Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general are being used in cybercrime.
Yeah, so cryptocurrency is one of the key technological advancements that we've really identified as a driver behind the rise in cybercrime, specifically when we talk about something like ransomware. Previously, cyber criminals would use traceable forms of payment. We'll call it ransomware classic, basically. They would use Western Union, they'd use Zcash, they'd use money orders or something like that. All of those things are fairly easily traceable by law enforcement, and so a lot of cyber criminals were busted. When cryptocurrency came into existence, this gave them that pseudo-anonymous form of payment they could use to basically collect their money without being directly tagged with that transaction. And you can see this is an example of a ransom note with instructions right down at the bottom on creating a Bitcoin wallet, buying Bitcoin, sending Bitcoin to the criminal. And this is, again, the most common way now that we see extortions being paid. Interestingly enough, it's also being used against cyber criminals. There are several law enforcement agencies around the world, including the Department of State's Transnational Organized Crime Rewards Program, where if you provide information about the identities of cyber criminals, they will pay you in cryptocurrency, so you can receive that reward anonymously. So yeah, kind of an interesting back and forth there.
So criminals are also trying to steal cryptocurrency. Of course, billions of dollars in cryptocurrency have been stolen over the past few years. And the number one way that they do that is they try to steal your keys. So if you have cryptocurrency like up in the cloud, let's say, make sure you're using multi-factor authentication and you're taking other precautions. Also, if you're storing it locally, like on your computer or things like that, we see a lot of malware that will automatically zip through your system and look for any cryptocurrency keys and just steal them and then immediately transfer your money. So consider using secure forms, secure methods to store your keys. But don't lose track. There are some trade-offs. It is possible to keep your keys too secure. For example, this German programmer had stored his keys to his wallet with over $220 million in it on a hard drive. And he forgot the password to that hard drive. I'm sure it was extremely secure because he didn't want anyone to steal it. And unfortunately, he himself was not able to get to it. So at this time, January 2021, he had 2 guesses left. I heard a rumor that he tried them both and failed, which means that the hard drive self-destructed and his keys were gone. So there's a lot of cryptocurrency out there, unfortunately, on the blockchain where people may have just lost those keys, and we won't get it again until quantum computing figures it out. But Matt, tell us a little bit about some more secure ways to store your cryptocurrency keys.
Yeah, sure. So similar to how we would use something like a YubiKey to store our public-private key pairs for authentication purposes for MFA, you can also get hardware wallets that will store the keys for your cryptocurrency wallets on an offline device. And this can be really useful. I mean, if we're on a computer system and we are worried about the integrity of that system, whether there's malware that's searching for those keys or the mnemonics that we use to get into wallets, if we have those stored offline and we only use them when we're actually performing a transaction, that makes it a lot less likely those keys are going to be stolen. So if you are investing heavily in cryptocurrency, I highly recommend getting yourself a cold wallet or an offline wallet like this.
Thanks for the advice, Matt.
Sure.
Okay, so as you see, asymmetric key encryption is extremely effective. We've already covered cryptocurrency and passkeys. Let's talk about how it can be used for things like digitally signed contracts or surfing the web securely. So first of all, in order to understand this, we need to know what a digital certificate is. When it comes to cryptocurrency, we didn't really care about linking a public-private key pair to someone's identity. But when it comes to things like digital contracts, we sure do. We want to know whose private key or whose public key it is, and we want to be able to trust that. So a digital certificate, for those of you that have heard that term, is really just a file that links identifying information to a specific key pair. So here you can see a certificate that's issued by Microsoft, and it has information about Microsoft.com, identifying information. This is Microsoft Corporation. Here's my public key. How do we know this is really Microsoft? Well, somebody we trust, Baltimore Cyber Trust Root, has double checked who this is and signed it. And we trust Baltimore Cyber Trust Root. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I don't trust Baltimore Cyber Trust Root, but your computer does. Your computer comes pre-baked with the public keys of lots and lots of key signing authorities. And so when your computer checks to see is this a correct signature, it has that public key that it trusts already, and it can verify the answer is yes. So just keep in mind, this is already deployed. Your computer, we use asymmetric key cryptography every single day, like when you visit a website, and your computer will check and see, yep, I trust that key signer, and they said this really is Microsoft Corporation. Let's talk about how this works with digitally signed contracts. Matt, I know you just did a little research on how Adobe Sign works. Do you want to share?
Yeah, Adobe Sign functions based off of those certificates. So again, when we have a certificate, we have a public-private key pair that's directly related to a specific person or organization. In this case, you can see an example that is a public-private key pair for Sherry, specifically. Now, if Sherry wants to sign a contract using a digital signature, she can do that using that certificate. And the way it works in general is the application, in this case we'll use Adobe as the example, will append that certificate to whatever document Sherry is signing. It will then take a hash of that document, because remember, we want to make sure nothing changes, and then Sherry's going to use her private key to sign that hash. This can then be verified on the other end the next time the application opens, and this accomplishes two things. One, we know that it was in fact Sherry who signed that document, and we also know that the document has not changed, and that's how we can do things like digital signatures. That's how things like DocuSign function. That's how a lot of other digital signature chains work. And it's made for the need to be in person and actually sign with a pad and pencil, kind of irrelevant to a lot of modern contracts. Nice kind of jump forward in technology.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We can also use this same technology to surf the web securely. So that little lock icon on your browser, that's all about public-private key cryptography. We use this to authenticate the web server, make sure we're not going to a phishing site. We can use this to actually encrypt your communications. Again, that's asymmetric key cryptography, actually in conjunction with symmetric. This is implemented using transport layer security, also known as TLS. That's the later version of SSL, which you may also be familiar with. So let's see how this works. Number one, if I go to, for example, wellsfargo.com, how do I know that this is really Wells Fargo? Well, I click on the little lock icon, and the web server will show me a certificate. I don't know how many of you ever do this, but check it out. Check out that certificate. You can see things like the name of the entity and also the certificate authority that issued that certificate. They're collecting the information and verifying it. And remember, the trust here is only as good as how well they're doing verifying this organization. There have definitely been issues where certificate authorities did not vet things well enough, and they issued a certificate incorrectly. So you really do need to trust that certificate authority. And then again, it has the information regarding the website's owner in that certificate as well. So then your browser will check a few different things relating to the certificate. It'll verify that the info in the certificate is correct and that it hasn't been modified. It'll make sure that the certificate has not expired. It'll look at the revocation status. Has the certificate been revoked? Sometimes that happens, like if the server's private keys were compromised, for example, it can be revoked. And all this is done by verifying the signature using the root CA's public key. So there is a signature on this certificate that we can then verify using the public key that came built into our computer. So that's how authentication of websites works. And now, how does the confidentiality piece work? When we're encrypting data across the internet, how do we do it? Well, remember, symmetric key encryption is really fast, so we want to encrypt our information with symmetric keys. And that is partly what happens. Your computer has a session that you've built with a web server. Let's say you're going to a website, and there's actually two sessions. One for information going one way, there's two session keys, and the second one is a session key for information going the other way. So those are symmetric key encryption, and you want to use that because it's going really fast. The problem is, how do you and the server get the same key? Remember the problem? We can't just yell 42 across the internet because everybody will figure it out. So that's where asymmetric key encryption comes in. Your computer goes and gets the server's public key, which is available anytime you see that lock icon. It will lock up that shared secret, the symmetric key, with the server's public key and then send it across the internet. And then only the server can unlock that message with their private key, and they're able to recover the symmetric key that you then use for your session. I know this was super technical. You guys are doing a great job. I hope this demystifies how that little lock icon works. And now we're going to move on to something a little more high level. But in the meantime, again, if you have any questions about how the little lock icon in your web browser works, drop us a line. I'm available on LinkedIn. We'll also have time for a few questions afterwards. Okay, so public-private key encryption can solve so many problems. And honestly, we are not leveraging this technology as much as we could be. I'll give you an example of this. Someone on my team texted me a few months ago and said, "Hey, sorry for the crazy late text, just checking that this is not in fact from you." And they had received an email from Sherry Davidoff. I'm a CEO, so I get spoofed all the time. It said to my employee, "Do you have a moment? I have a request I want you to handle discreetly. I am going for a meeting now, so no calls, just reply to my email, Sherry Davidoff." Now, do you guys think this is legitimate? No. Check out our scams and fraud webinar, which is in your list of recordings. So I responded and said, "Definitely not. This is definitely not me." And then I reminded him, remember, all of my legitimate emails are cryptographically signed with my private key. And I feel lucky I can say that because since day one, really day zero of LMG security, all of our internal emails have been cryptographically signed with my private key and also encrypted. And really, if everyone did this, if we had this turned on in all organizations, it would be so much easier to detect phishing emails. Honestly, I think this is, at least a digital signing is something everyone should do. So here's a real email from me that I sent to my staff member, just says education. And I said, remember, this message is digitally signed and encrypted. And you can see that the Outlook, Microsoft Outlook, actually pops up and says on every message, this message was digitally signed and encrypted by Sherry at davidoffsecurity.com. You can click on the details and view the signing certificate. And actually go in and see that it was really me, that the certificate is valid, and I'm at LMG Security, all those details, and that all of this is correct. So the tools that we use for this are SMIME, which are supported by Microsoft 365. You can also use open source and free tools like PGP, GPG. In Outlook, it also supports Outlook message encryption. So those are a few ways that you can do this. And in our situation, we've set it up so that my keys are only local. They're not in the cloud. And we'll get to why that's important in a few minutes. They're definitely harder to steal. So we can use this technology to defend very effectively against phishing scams. Here's a few examples of phishing scams. Are you busy? I need you to process a wire transfer for me today. There's another one that looks like it's from the IT desk. Here's another one that looks like it's from a billing clerk. All of these, the problem is that it's very hard to tell them from legitimate emails. Recipients don't have an easy way to tell if it's from the sender that you think it is. Imagine if all of them had a message that said this signature is not valid, or this message was not digitally signed and encrypted, or something like that, you know? So if we were to use this technology, it would be much easier for people to tell when messages were legitimate or not. And it's not that hard to set up, honestly. So that's the digital signing piece when it comes to email. The other piece is that it's possible to use this exact same technology to encrypt emails by default. And that's important because hacked email accounts are not just a major risk, they are a huge expense. They have caused over $2.7 billion worth of losses just because hackers are getting into email accounts. They're able to analyze your conversations, get in the middle of them, send messages that are spoofed and not really from who you think they are. And they can also cause data breaches because once they get into emails, they can access attachments, they can access sensitive information. If only there were a way to make it so that when, not if, hackers break into your email, they still can't see anything. Well, it turns out there is. Again, it's pretty easy to do. This is what a hacker would see if they broke into my email. Do not take this as an invitation to check. But if a hacker broke into my email, all of my internal messages are automatically encrypted. And all they would see is this. They would see subject lines. They would see from and to, and they would not be able to read the content. They would not be able to read the attachment because I have the key on my system. Only it's a whole nother layer of protection. This is called end-to-end encryption, if you're curious. That's what makes it different from encryption in transit, SSL, or TLS encryption. So if somebody asks if you use end-to-end encryption, this is an example of end-to-end encryption in effect. Now you might say to yourself, I bet this is really hard. No, it's not. Here's me sending an email to Tom Pohl, our penetration testing team lead, who many of you have met on these webinars. And I'm saying, here's an encrypted email. This is a test. And it's done by default. I click on SMIME in the upper right, and it's already checked by default. It knows that every time I type Tom's name in, it will just automatically encrypt it. Boom, done. And it's sent, by the way, under the hood using Tom's public key. So here's an example of what Tom's public key looks like. It has his email address associated with it. It is cryptographically signed. Anyone can verify that this signature is correct. But all of this happens automatically under the hood. I don't have to do anything. That's important. So then it goes across the internet. Tom reads my email. He has to do absolutely nothing. His email software automatically uses the private key on his computer to decrypt it. This is with Outlook, which many people use. And we're done. And again, he can see that this message was digitally signed and encrypted. So he knows that it's encrypted when it's on that server. Really a very effective way to reduce the risk of email hacking and business email compromise. So this is different from what many people think of when you think of encrypted email. I bet a lot of you think of like, oh, I'll get a link, I'll click in it, I go to a website, there's an email in the website, I'll pick the password fluffy, 98. That is not in my opinion, a super secure way to send messages because you end up with a lot of weak passwords up there on web service. Real end-to-end encrypted email is sent directly to your inbox. You have a public key and a private key. Everybody has your public key and they lock up messages to you using your public key, and only you have your private key. It is a file on your computer that you keep secret. It's possible for you to keep it locked up in the cloud as well. Or it's possible for you to keep it in the cloud as well, which can facilitate some things. And often there's a passphrase too to go with it. So anyway, that's a summary of how we have these really powerful technologies that are under implemented and under deployed. And all of us, from those of you that run organizations and IT teams to insurers, all of us should be thinking about why are we not deploying this technology more, particularly digital signing, which is so easy to do. All right, I'm gonna hop off my soapbox here for a second. Okay, there we go. One question we get a lot is, how can you tell if encryption is strong? Well, number one, you need to store those keys securely, as we've talked about. Attackers are constantly trying to steal public keys. Think about where your keys are stored. There was a Mimecast hack a couple years ago where hackers hijacked their products using private keys. SolarWinds, the reason it took so long to detect that there was a backdoor in their product is because it was digitally signed with the correct private keys for the company. So those are just a couple examples where attackers try to steal private keys and they can do some damage with it. The other ways that you can tell if encryption is strong are by looking at the key length and the algorithms that are used. And the key length is particularly important because if your keys are really short, then computers can iterate through and guess the key and crack your encryption. And of course, you need a strong algorithm so that people can't bypass or reverse engineer things. Now, right now, an example of an algorithm and a key length that are currently considered strong is RSA 2048. That refers to the length of the key, 2048 bits. That has gone up and up and up over the years as computing power has gotten better and better. And that is why so many people are concerned about quantum computing. Matt, take it away.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about quantum computing and how it's going to impact encryption as we move forward with more technological advancements. We get this question very, very frequently, especially when we talk about cryptography. And the question in general comes down to, will encryption still function once quantum computing gains sufficient popularity and sufficient use in kind of general society? And the answer is kind of yes and no. Here's why we want to talk about that. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what quantum computing actually is, because there are some misnomers about how quantum computers actually function. Some people think they're just very, very fast computers, which on a top level is true. What we're really talking about is a beautiful marriage between technology and physics. We're working off of a couple of very, very high concepts. We're not going to go into depth on this. We're just going to give a brief overview, but it functions off of a couple of physics properties known as entanglement and superposition. Basically what it means is on a standard computer system, we represent things as a 1 or a 0. In a quantum computer, we can represent those as any different variation of those things simultaneously. And when we're talking about encryption, especially public-private key encryption, we're really just talking about math. Fundamentally, this is not a difficult equation that we're trying to solve. It's just very, very time-consuming because of the length of the keys that we use. Sherry mentioned RSA 2048. When we talk about an RSA 2048 key, that's a 617-digit long key. That is a massive, massive number. So for a standard computer system to work through and try to guess what that number is, it's going to take billions upon trillions of years. It's just not a feasible thing to have happen. However, with a quantum computer, we can basically guess all of those numbers simultaneously, and then we can use some quantum trickery to have it spit out what the actual key number is that we're looking for. And it can do this in theory in a very, very short amount of time. This has been proven already. It is something that will likely happen in the future, but don't worry. We are not telling you to panic at this point in time. We want everyone to take a breath, relax, and understand a couple of things. While there are some forms of encryption that are vulnerable to quantum computing, there are multiple forms that are not as vulnerable or vulnerable really at all. Asymmetric key encryption, yes, that is potentially vulnerable in some formats. But things like symmetric key encryption and hashing are not as vulnerable. They are quantum computing resistant, especially with a sufficiently long key. So we want to remind people, don't panic. We're probably decades away from this even being a problem with symmetric or asymmetric key encryption. And even then, we have things like Kyber encryption or Kerberos-style encryption, which, again, are naturally resistant to quantum computing just based on how they're put together. So, again, we're doing pretty well. NIST has also addressed this. I threw a YouTube link on the slide if you want to go hear it from their mouths. They will walk through some of the explanations as to why this is, while it makes a good headline, not something that is incredibly concerning at this point in time, and probably won't be for several decades at this point. So again, don't panic. Everything will be okay, and there are already plans in place to counteract this kind of computing technology and keep encryption functioning at a strong and high level.
Thanks, Matt. Did you generate this image, by the way, with AI?
I totally did.
Okay, so takeaways here. Encryption has huge potential. I would love to see more people using digitally signed email, for example. Let's get rid of phishing as a problem. Let's get rid of scams. Keep your keys and your passwords safe. Honestly, a strong encryption really relies on safe keys. Pay attention to warnings, especially those that relate to certificates or invalid signatures. And don't panic about quantum computing. Those are our big takeaways today. All right, if you have any questions, drop us a line. I'm Sherry Davidoff. This is Matt Duran. Smash that like button, as Matt usually says, and we will stick around a few minutes for questions if you would care to send us any.
Well, thank you, Sherry and Matt. We did have a few questions that came in from the audience during the presentation, one of which was, what top 2 or 3 would you guys suggest are the best cold wallets from a security point of view?
So the best cold wallets from a security point of view, the ones that I've used and had experience with have all been Ledger wallets. Now, Ledger, to be perfectly frank, did have a security incident not too long ago, so that's something to keep in mind. But those, as far as both construction and security of the devices, have been about the best on the market. I mean, there's a ton of different ones out there, but instead of giving you 2 or 3, I would say all of the best ones I've worked with have all been that specific brand. They don't pay me to say that, by the way. That's just from my experience.
Well, thank you. The next question is are there any types of encryption that quantum computing won't break?
Won't break and have a hard time breaking are kind of two different things. So when we talk about things that are quantum computing resistant, it means that given enough time, they can still be broken. It just takes a really, really long time, even with a very powerful system, to do that. And when we talk about that, some of the encryption algorithms that are already in use are great examples. The Kyber algorithms, the Kerberos type of encryption that gets used in standard Windows systems. All of those in general are going to be resistant. And the longer we make those encryption keys, the more complex we make that encryption, the harder it's going to be for a computer system to break. When we talk about key length too, that's one of the biggest factors when we talk about the security of encryption. Like RSA 2048, which is currently one of the accepted secure standards, that's supposed to be good up until about 2030. After that, we go to RSA 4096, which is still already in use, but it just means the keys get a lot longer and a lot more difficult to guess at that point. So that's probably where we're going to see that go.
Well, I'm glad you used the word guess, because keep in mind when it comes to breaking encryption, there's always some luck associated with it. You could get lucky. You could crack that encryption sooner, because we're really just trying to guess the key. Same with cryptocurrency mining. You could guess the answer really quickly and get lucky, or you could get very unlucky. So there's always some element of chance to it.
Well, thank you. And then we've got time for one more, which is, how do I know if the secure website I'm looking at is actually secure?
Yeah. Sherry, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I mean, number one, I would go back to that little lock icon that we talked about. And what does it mean to be secure for you? I mean, it's a personal question, but number one, I want to authenticate who owns that website. You know, make sure that they are who they say they are. Look at the certificate carefully. Make sure you trust the signer, and your computer will come in pre-built with certificates that tell you if it's a trusted signer. And then you want to make sure that you may want to make sure your information is encrypted. Sometimes we're not sending back and forth anything super sensitive, but more often than not, it's wise to make sure that your data is encrypted as well. So just double check and you can make sure that your information is actually encrypted in transit as well. And if you have any questions about configuration or the details, again, feel free to drop us a line.
Well, thank you, Sherry and Matt. Once again, this is Sarah with LMG Security. We'd like to thank everyone who attended and stayed a little bit longer for questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.